we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Barbara Lee Van Horsen from the Momentum Center, and joining me is Steve Chappell actually leading us is Steve Chappell from WGVU. So Steve, I know you have some introductory words to share.
Yes, good evening and welcome to this conversation involving the documentary Reunited States. My name is Steve Chappell. I'm the grants manager with WGVU Public Media. Tonight's event is part of a grant-funded project in partnership with the Fetzer Institute located in Kalamazoo, livingroomconversations.org, a national organization, the Momentum Center, of course, Joe Gash, President and CEO of the Chamber of Grand Haven, Spring Lake, and Ferrisburg, and Floyd Cook Jr., membership chair of the NAACP Muskegon Heights branch. And we also, of course, thank Meyer for being an ongoing partner in the Momentum Center monthly events. WGVU's role really is as a neutral convener, responsible for representing the interest of all residents in the areas we serve. Many of you have viewed Reunited States, or if you haven't, the viewing portal, of which you would have gotten a link to, will be open for another 2 days. This documentary, profiles the transformative journey of individuals seeking to bridge divide through listening and learning from one another's stories to better understand how each of our journeys influences our perspectives and beliefs. Conversation, of course, is as much a part of listening as it is speaking, a delicate balance that can challenge all of us at times. Tonight's conversation between Joy and Floyd and the experience all of us will share in the breakout rooms may perhaps provide some tips to positively impact our own conversations in the community while we're at work and on a daily basis in our own families. I will be serving as a co-host this evening, helping to facilitate the conversations along with Barbara, Executive Director of the Momentum Center. Now back to you, Barbara.
All right, thank you, Steve. So as we begin this evening, we have made it our practice with our town halls about all different subjects to have a land acknowledgement statement. So we want to acknowledge the land on which we gather. We recognize the people of the three fires, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi peoples on whose land we are gathered. The three fires people are indigenous to this land, which means that this is their ancestral territory. Every university, congregation, institution, business, and monument here in West Michigan is built on stolen native land. We also recognize that the Grand River that flows through this land remains home to many Native American tribal communities across the region, including the people of the three fires. We are guests on their land using their water, and one way to practice right relationships is to develop genuine ways to acknowledge the histories and traditions of the people who originated here first, who are still here, and to tend to the land and water always. As we make this land and water acknowledgement, we know that it is but an important first step, and that there are many more we need to take when we decide to engage in the important work of social justice and equity. I always like to give a warning as we go into virtual conversations because we have been Zoom bombed in the past. We have somebody running security. So if someone shows up who is a bad actor, we'll be able to remove them right away. But I do need everyone to know that there's not 100, we can't guarantee 100% that nobody will show up and be offensive. Again, if that happens, we will immediately remove them. So our agenda for tonight is as follows. We heard our welcome and our welcome. I have some more instructions to give, and then we'll hear from our panelists. We'll have a question and answer period, go into small group breakout sessions, have some final polling, and talk about next steps. A few instructions for tonight. We ask that you put yourself on mute and stay on mute unless you're asked to unmute yourself. We do have closed captioning available, so you can turn subtitles on if you'd like that. We ask you to submit your questions and your comments in the chat box. And as I said, we will have a Q&A period, so you can ask your questions there. When we have the breakout sessions, you do need to have the Zoom app downloaded on your computer. You can't do that from the browser. And that's where it's especially important to please keep your camera on, because it really does help build trust when you can see the people you're talking to and not feel that somebody is just listening into the conversation. We are recording this conversation tonight, and we will make that available. And if any other action steps come out of this, we'll be sure to let all the participants know about that. And finally, we have our communication guidelines and ground rules. The first one is honesty. We don't get together to debate. This isn't about who's right and who's wrong, but it's about having an honest conversation, being willing to share what we honestly believe, what our experiences have been, and to be willing to listen to the experiences and beliefs of others. Equality, we have a couple of fantastic panelists tonight, but all of us are equal and valuable contributors to the conversation. We want to practice respect, recognizing that we all have preconceived ideas and they can get in the way of our listening to each other. So we want to be aware of that so we can remain respectful at all times. We want to practice active listening. Steve talked a little bit about that. The idea that we need to listen to learn rather than listen to respond. And in a virtual meeting, that can be especially challenging. So I challenge us all to active listen. Responsibility, we all have hot buttons. Those can get triggered unintentionally. If it happens, we ask you to name that without blaming somebody else for it. So we own our words and our emotions. And this is a shame-free zone. We all want to be able to express how we think and we feel, and be able to ask questions without being worried about being shut down or shamed. If everybody's okay with the ground rules, we'll go on. If you have difficulty with any of those ground rules, then this might be a good time to excuse yourself and come back to a conversation in the future when you feel more inclined to abide by these rules. This is just a short clip to refresh our memory of Reunited States.
I went on this journey trying to figure out what's causing the problem, and I found out that I'm part of the problem. It exposed something in myself that I didn't want to see, that's deeply rooted in all of us. The belief that certain people have more value than others.
It has been hard for me to come to terms with the darkness that lies within inside of me. And that darkness judges people before I meet them. And that's a hard thing to face.
It was horrendously difficult and full of tears, asking the question, what in the hell are we doing right now? Why are we here?
We have no home to return to. We have no job to return to. I've never felt more irresponsible in my life. But the transformation that we're going through in our minds and in our hearts is worth every penny of this.
So we felt a responsibility to take these stories and to share them with people like me who don't know there's a problem. And that feels impossible.
When I look at this nationally, it's hard to be optimistic. But meeting people across the country who have a passion to see our divisions healed, that gives me hope.
And I'll turn things over to Steve.
Thanks, Barbara. I'd like to read a short bio about Joy and Floyd, and I'm sure we'll get to know much more about them as they engage in conversation. Joy Gass joined the staff of the Chamber of Commerce, Grand Haven, Spring Lake, and Ferrisburg as president in 2000, as president and CEO then. She is a graduate of the Institute for Organizational Management, Notre Dame, and has spent 35 years in the management of not-for-profit organizations. She is a member of the American Chamber of Commerce Executives and is a member of the Michigan Association of Chamber Professionals, as well as serving on the board of directors in the capacity as treasurer, vice chair, and chair. Joy served on Ottawa County's Workforce Development Board for 9 years past Muskegon Community College Strategic Planning Committees, Leadership West Michigan Steering Committee, and West Michigan Strategic Alliance. She served on the Grand Haven Coast Guard Festival Board as its treasurer, is a member of Grand Haven Rotary, Grand Haven Lighthouse Conservancy Board Treasurer, Grand Haven Economic Development Corporation Chair, and a member of Housing Next Advocacy Advisory Council. She is currently immediate past chair and current secretary of the Board of Trustees of North Ottawa Community Health Systems. Floyd Cook Jr. moved from Arkansas to Michigan in the 1940s. He was the first Black drum major and a star basketball player in Muskegon Heights Public Schools, winning many awards, statewide awards. Floyd graduated in 1964 from Western Michigan University, where he excelled in sports and was the first African American to receive a BS degree in engineering. He went on to earn a master's degree from University of Michigan. Floyd had an illustrious career as a mechanical engineer, receiving several patent awards and held leadership positions in multiple professional organizations. Floyd is a former facilitator and the director for the Institute for Healing Racism, Muskegon, former Muskegon Community College sociology adjunct faculty, former executive board member of President Obama's signature My Brother's Keeper project of Muskegon. He is an accomplished saxophonist as a member of the Christ Temple Church Music Ministry, a public speaker, and an actor with Civic Theater. In recent years, Floyd has been presented with numerous awards, including in 2019 being inducted into the Muskegon Heights High School Hall of Fame for musical, educational, and career accomplishments. Floyd is blessed with 4 daughters and a large extended family. He gives back to the village that helped raise him by mentoring area youth, serving as a membership chairperson, Muskegon chapter NAACP, and strengthening his community in many other ways. We welcome Joy and Floyd to this conversation. Joy, when you think about Reunited States, what did you come away from it feeling, and what did you take away from it?
It was a very interesting experience, because when I first started watching it, I thought this is going to be an interesting story. And at each encounter that the folks had, my interest and my enthusiasm at where this was going just grew. It was extremely thought-provoking. I was pleased at the diversity of the topics that they encountered on their journey. But it really left me questioning, if I were in their shoes, how would I have done it? Would I have done it any differently? Would I have had a different approach with people? I think in the beginning, the recognition that we all have unintentional biases, and we don't know what we don't know about ourselves until we're put in a situation where we're having a conversation with someone that all of a sudden you become aware that you have no idea how you felt about that, or that you did feel anyway. So it was very thought-provoking, and it encouraged me to look forward to this evening to have the conversation to see how other people viewed it as well.
You viewed Reunited States in person at the Momentum Center.
Yes, correct.
What were your thoughts?
I was a little disappointed. I could appreciate the family that took off across the country to assess the ununitedness and concerns of our country. And I was waiting for the key culprit that over my years of being on this earth and in these United States, I was waiting for more of the in-depth discussion of let's say, our country's history, which got us to this undividedness. which takes us to the need for more education and indeed more truth. And ultimately, my life experience in growing up during the, let's say, the discrimination periods of our lives, being a kid in 1940s, growing up a little in the 50s, being introduced to the NAACP and its objective of, for all people, but in particular minorities, of receiving equal justice in all institutions across our country. So the film touched on a lot of the emotions and crisis events that have caused us to become undivided or divided. And I was waiting for sort of phase two of the video to look at the reason why and how come the divide, over and beyond being Republican or Democrat or in between the independents. So I was waiting for more. So I'm hoping for a part two of this whole subject, because it's going to have to bring our country to the realization that we've got to have honest conversations on the subject of race and white supremacy, which have been the foundations of the founding of our country. And we have not been honestly talking about those issues on a consistent basis. That's my 2 cents for now.
Well, and I would say, Floyd, that Floyd and I agreed on that, because I got to the end and I said, it's great that we raised all these issues. It's great that we had these conversations. It's great that it's brought to the surface maybe some of those underlying conversations that you typically don't have. But what's the root cause? Why we haven't touched what the root cause is. And I think it's a combination of not only what Floyd shared with us, but I think it's the whole environment today, that it's us versus them. And you're kind of, you believe here. If you believe here, you can't believe over here, because you are bound by whatever tenets in your life that you think that you have to answer to somebody for. And so I think that was in part why this discussion is so important, because Floyd and I both come from very, very different walks of life, except we both play the saxophone. Or I used to play the saxophone, and I didn't know that about him before. But I think that's why it was so. I after Floyd and I met, because we did not know each other before this, I thought this is going to be a very interesting discussion, because we are so very, very different, and our backgrounds and our life experiences are very different. So as with everybody, we all have different experiences. But so I'm looking forward to it.
One of the things too that I wanted more from the video was the fact that, calling on my experience with the Institute for Healing Racism and the parallel objective of the NAACP, a couple of years ago, we celebrated 100 years of that social civic organization being in existence across the country of the United States. And we have struggled to recognize the content of the founding documents. It starts off really nice, the preamble. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men, and later on women got included in that in that notion. life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and all those good things. Well, the NAACP got its origin for the mere fact that we were not equally enjoying life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in this country. And we have struggled to talk about it because of the hierarchy, shall we say. The majority race was in charge, and we have to recognize the fact that our founding documents were drawn up by white men. We've got a lot of re-educating of our public, and I didn't really get a good dose of our country's history until after I had received my college degrees, and in joining with the Institute for Healing Racism, and things really accelerated through social media. And I became an unofficial educator on entities, sites like Facebook and so on and so forth. The more I learned, the more I shared. And so our country has to reckon with white supremacy. We have to talk. I don't have any problems in talking with anybody, no matter what color you are. But it's difficult based on our population's database. That we know individually, that we've learned from others, and that we have been programmed to believe that many things are not necessarily true. And so the struggle is who's in power, who's running the institutions, and I mean all institutions. The current problem that we're having now is the oppression and restricting of things that our young people should read and not read. Education again, but who's publishing the books? Who's on the staff? Who are the writers, and so forth? We've got to have honest, continuous dialogue to work our way out of this divisive situation of Republicans, Democrats, or the white folks and the black folks and the red folks and the yellow folks. We're all supposed to be of the same common democracy, following the same rules and regulations and being respectful of one another. But we're just not treating each other that way for power, prestige, money, so on and so forth. 2 more cents.
Well, I think as you were sharing all the points that all make sense to us that are here. And I think the struggle that I find is having a conversation with someone who doesn't feel the same way you do. And I have in my job, I have told that it's very, very important that I am always politically correct. And unfortunately, I think the kind of conversations that you are talking about can be respectful, but they're not always politically correct. And it is, so it's really challenging. And I think as individuals like me, finding out how I can have a dialogue with someone who is, and let's just use books in school. That makes me very uncomfortable when somebody's trying to censor us in any way, shape, or form. But yet to have a conversation, to open the door to talk about why I feel that way. I have actually been put in a situation where I just have to back off and say, well, I'm going to respectfully disagree with you. However, I feel it's gone nowhere. So I think learning how to have that conversation with someone where you can state your view and why you feel the way you do, and then try and find a way to have them really talk about what the real issue is behind it for them. But I haven't figured out how to do it yet.
Yeah. You know, and we're talking about conversations that are needed between everyday folks like us, okay?
Yeah.
Now, but however, our country has gravitated in leadership to the extent that those in major leadership roles are have control of the major narratives.
Mm-hmm.
And we are fed certain things that are not necessarily true, and it's the information that's disseminated through our various media sources. They are often measured, and the truth does not necessarily come through. We need a good dose or continued dose of the history of this country from the day that Columbus found his way here accidentally, okay, which is another whole subject of him, quote, discovering America as if it was here all by itself and nobody else was here, and he got all the accolades. But we need to go from there all the way up through 1619, the introduction of slavery and all of its elements, good and bad, all the way to the founding fathers, that document, and really look at the truth of that journey and how we got to be where we are now, because the answers are in our history. We didn't just get ourselves into this divided situation during the last 20 or 30 years. It was there when the civil rights movement got its momentum in the 50s and 60s. What we went through during the assassinations of the Kennedys, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, the list goes on and on. Why? It's because the truth was being suppressed, and a large percentage of those in power did not want the truth to be known because they felt threatened in their positions of power. And so we're still dealing with that today. And unfortunately, because of what we're experiencing, because of our last president, those fear attitudes and suppression attitudes, and the fear that certain folks are going to lose something if we talk honestly about equality and equity. That's where we are now. And so we've got to deal with almost the people who mean well. And if we are true to a democracy, then all of us must recognize that we are all recognized as equal by our Creator. But until we rise to that level of treating one another as equals across all aspects of our lives, and to really follow through on the democratic process that is technically in the hands of those of us who are voters. But you can obviously see that there are huge efforts being mounted towards oppressing the vote, restricting persons from voting, setting up a system where only certain people in power will determine who's going to be the leadership structure of our country, rather than leaving it to the voting population ourselves. So the conversation has to be held at the top as well as, quote, us at the bottom. But it can force that conversation, if large enough from the bottom, can force those at the top to see the handwriting on the wall and recognize that we need to do a better job of sharing democracy in our country. The George Floyd incident was just one classic example that echoed across the world. The people who saw the crime, the cruelty, the hypocrisy of our country. It came through during that tragic event, and supporters rallied to the cause across the country. But now we've gone a couple of years, and that type of momentum has subsided, and but we're still dealing with the need for sharing power and following through on all of our political and social and civic activities that really show that we are all equal, no matter what color, and that we're treating each other as such. You know, in church, we typically recognize those of our parishioners and friends as brothers and sisters, particularly in the Black community. I've got some white brothers and sisters, okay, that I grew up with. High school, started off with Little League Baseball, okay, and I was a minority in number and skin color. But some of those same people are my friends today. I grew up in Muskegon Heights, a very integrated community. My graduating class was 10% African American. And by the time that I went through college, the next 5 or 6 years, the demographics of the city completely reversed and reflected in the high school population. And that was, again, during the time of the 50s, late 50s and 60s, where the unrest of civil rights and equality and the assassinations were all happening. And so there was white flight, there was blockbusting, the whole 9 yards, and the assassinations. To suppress truth, we need to struggle to find truth, the true information, the true founding of our country, the goods and the bads that we've grown up to recognize, and a lot of our history a lot of our people don't even know about. So continued education, I would say, Joy. And we've all got to do it in our sphere of influence. And not be afraid to find out that some of our notions and our beliefs were wrong, and but that we went along with it to get along, and reassess just how are we being honest with ourselves, and in turn honest with our fellow brothers and sisters. Unless we deal with it now, we're just gonna pass the buck to the next generation.
Yeah, I think that, I think that's true on so many fronts, to fully understand the depth of the challenges that we face. And that was, as I watched the movie, there was one particular there were two scenes that were very particularly moving to me, and both of them are kind of women's issues. So I have to admit I'm a little biased that I'm and the one was when, and I've forgotten the woman's name. There was oh my gosh. Okay. Senior moment. The narrators. She was talking with, I think, a African-American Hispanic woman who had an experience in the hospital that was something that never should have happened to anybody. But she explained it, and she talked about it for the first time to a white woman who asked enough questions to get her to tell her story. But then the follow-up, when she said, I thought about when my daughter, who has Down syndrome, was born. I had more doctors and nurses in the room to take care of me, and no one took care of her. And that hit home, because I wonder how many women in this world have been put in that situation where they're irrelevant, and in a circumstance when it should be a joyous moment in their life. And that when I started thinking about even my own interactions with other people, and the way that I want to learn about them, and the way that I ask the questions about what's important in their life, or what they would like me to know about them, or what can we have a conversation about that we might not agree. I enjoy those kinds of conversations because I learn something all the time. And the other one was about the young woman with autism who was standing in front of a Planned Parenthood facility, and she was supporting Planned Parenthood. And I thought, especially with what's happened at the Supreme Court, how many women now are being put in a situation where they don't know what to do, they don't know where to go. And those two, and there were a lot of other things that were so thought-provoking, but I'm thinking about myself as a younger person, or my daughter, or my nieces and nephews, and all the folks that are involved in life in general. How do we broaden the conversation, but how do we make changes? We have a program through the chamber called Lakeshore Youth Leadership, and the kids, and it's basically kids from Muskegon Public Schools and Grand Haven Public Schools. The kids basically started talking about their perceptions of each other. And in the beginning, they didn't have very good perceptions of each other for various reasons. But we asked them to come up with kind of a theme of what they were going to do, and what kind of image that would have. And so they said, well, we need to build a bridge, but then we need to have water droplets that are small circles of change. And this came from kids. I mean, this was Mary Jane, probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 8th graders and 10th graders. It's a small group, but these kids, when you see them sitting and talking with each other and really sharing their stories and opening up to tell the other folks sitting there things that are happening in their lives that when I was their age, I would never thought of sharing. It would have been a very personal, private thing, but they were open with each other. And we had a wrap up, and one of the moms came. There was a young man who was just a standout football player who went through the program, and his wife said, or his mother said, he's really a good kid, but I asked him about what this youth leadership thing was. Why is he going? And so he kind of tried to explain it to me, and she said, I didn't really understand it. And so I decided I was going to come for myself, because I wanted to hear what was going on with these kids, because he changed. He became much more open. He became more communicative. He talked about the friends that he made in Grand Haven. He talked about why it was important that they were friends with kids in Grand Haven. And afterwards, she surprised us all, because she stood up and she said, I want you all to know that these kids have the answers. As adults, we need to listen to them, and we need to support them, and we need to be encouraging them to ask questions and learn about their neighbors, because when they go away to school, when they go to college, when they leave our safe spaces, they need to know how to live with other people and how to connect with other people. And those words have stayed with me. And I try in the people that I meet, and I try when I'm around the kids to really have good conversations with them and ask them how they would solve problems. And that's what our youth leadership program is all about. But it's only small circles of change. And I don't know how much time we have for small circles of change. But I'm encouraged by what the kids are doing and how they're supporting each other.
You know, what we need is community conversations. Every community needs an Institute for Healing Racism or projects like what are going on at Momentum. Kids have no problem in solving problems as they see them. We adults have grown to be stubborn and resistant to change. And again, this whole area of having been programmed in terms of thinking that we should change the value that we've changed the values that we have in people. I'm searching for the right phrasing here. We've been programmed to value in terms of what we've been fed propaganda-wise, in terms of there's a real difference in races, that we're so different and that we can't possibly get along together. And so therefore we need to separate ourselves and live with, quote, our own kind and live happily ever after, which is contrary to democracy, okay? And so unfortunately, we can't leave it to kids to solve adult problems. We adults, again, have to step forward and have these community conversations and sharing truth and looking further into our history databases, because there is so much that we don't know. And again, as I said earlier, I didn't find out a whole lot of what's going on until after I got my 2 college degrees, okay? And being the first African-American to graduate from the College of Engineering at Western, I took the bull by the horn and I thought I had made it. And but during my almost 30 years of engineering, every major corporation that I worked for in Western Michigan, I was the only. In looking back at our educational system, because my high school counselor told me, you know, Floyd, I would suggest you go into another career search because there are no colored people in engineering. Okay, so Floyd, you know, went on to Western and said, I'm going to be the first.
Thank you for being the first, Floyd. We're really appreciative and grateful for your persistence in doing that. There are questions and comments that have been made in the chat, and we want to make sure that we have time to answer those questions and then to go into our small groups. So Mary Jane is going to facilitate our Q&A time. I'll turn it over to you, Mary Jane.
Joy and Floyd, we have some questions specifically for each of you and then some for both of you to answer. So this first one's for Joy. Barbara was in a meeting today with human resource professionals talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. They said that the pushback from some of their leaders is that this conversation creates division. How do we help our business leaders understand that the division is already there and talking about it is doing the work of DEI?
I think it's a challenge that we have been dealing with at the chamber for 18 years. We had pulled together, working with Cascade Engineering, that had a really amazing diversity and inclusion program, and they helped us put together a program called Introspect, which was really about understanding diversity and biases. And we offered it in the community, particularly geared toward HR and our manufacturers. We were also very active with the Grand Rapids Chamber. We had the West Michigan Chamber Coalition, and we worked with regionally to try and kind of be able to identify within our manufacturers the impact of the lack of diversity on their workforce. Remember, this was 18 years ago, and as Floyd said, you know, things have changed somewhat, but not a whole lot in our community. We still are not very diverse. But we ran the program for a year. It was well attended. Folks were really, the HR folks were really supportive. It went nowhere. We tried the next year to run it again. It went nowhere. We have surveyed companies, and this was not only in Muskegon and Ottawa County, but also it was Kent County. I had a conversation when information came back from the county on this not being a welcoming, or the county wanting this to be a welcoming community, and there was a survey done. I went back to that study because we tried to make a business case for diversity. And I think that it's my own personal opinion that it is going to take continual conversation with our employers in the community about what the benefits are of having a diverse workforce. We're not there yet. We were up at Michigan Tech Career Fest a week ago. I have to tell you that the number of engineers that were at Michigan Tech that are of a variety of different races, there were more African American folks, folks from India, folks from other Asian countries, than there were white engineers. And it's going to happen. It's going to happen here for us if we're going to continue to grow. It's going to have to, but we have to continually provide a welcome place for folks to come and want to live here. And that's a challenge. I don't have the answers. We just need to keep talking about it. We need to keep doing things like the Momentum Center is doing. Muskegon Community College is offering some unintentional bias and diversity and inclusion courses. We've upped the ante with the discussion. And that's the only way it's going to change, is to have those conversations. But when it has an economic impact on our businesses to be able to function, that's when you're going to see a real change.
Joy,
And
thank you
Floyd's
for
smiling at me.
Thank
Floyd's
you.
smiling, so I guess I did okay.
And thank you for facilitating the conversations and looking for the sweet spot to make it happen. The next question is for Floyd. Is there currently a branch of the NAACP in Muskegon Heights? Is membership open to people who live outside the community like Grand Haven and Spring Lake? And I'll just add, how might that be part of the solution?
Okay, and I meant to correct Steve on a little minor part of the introduction of the NAACP. It represents Muskegon County, and any person who is interested in joining the NAACP can join. no matter what color, okay? The structure of the NAACP across the country is that there are branches in all major cities. And so there's a branch in Grand Rapids, there's a branch in Detroit, and all cities, the small size of Muskegon growing up to a Detroit. And so depending on which municipality you're close to, that's where you can join a branch of the NAACP. But I'd be glad to give you Muskegon County's NAACP. Its branch number is 3147, and it represents all of Greater Muskegon. It is not specifically located in Muskegon Heights, okay? Although I love my native community, it is county-wide. Does that answer the question? And our branch is on Facebook. If those of us adults who are brave enough to venture that unique information source. And I can give you our information link address. Let's see, I don't know my paperwork here. NAACP Muskegon at gmail.com. And so that will link you to our secretary and executive committee members. And you can go from there in reaching me as membership chair, and I can send you the information by which you can become officially a member. By all rights, I would think that if we really want to make change, that all members of or citizens of the United States need to be members of the NAACP, because that is what we have in common, is to bring justice and liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to everyone. And so
Thank you, Mr. Cook.
Okay.
Here's the final question. Joy and Floyd, a brief closure here. What advice might you have from your position about how to engage in conversations to reunite? Joy, how about you go first? After you unmute.
Yeah, that's a good thing. You'd think by now, right? You would know. Hit the unmute. You know, I think as I review the movie in my mind, I am just reminded that it's very challenging, because it seems like in today's environment, everybody has an opinion. And I think a lot of people want to be heard, and a lot of folks want to get into conversations, but I just don't think that in a lot of situations, people are willing to take the time, but most of all, to listen to each other. I think in my in situations that I have been in, when I'm having a conversation with someone, it's very hard to be heard, because they're more engaged in wanting to make sure that they can convince you why they're right. So they aren't listening. And that's something that I've taken away from this, is I need to listen more, because I think there are probably times, because those of you that know me know I can get pretty passionate and go on and on and on. And perhaps I'm not listening like I should. And maybe that's a lesson that we all need to take, is how do we listen better? And then how do we ask questions that are non-threatening, which is really hard, because I think in my own family, I have found the way that I ask questions will get me different kind of results. And so listening, and thinking very carefully in the way that you respond so that you continue the conversation.
Thank you, Joy. Floyd, you're going to close us out with the final remarks before we go to our small breakout rooms. What guidance do you have so that we can have conversations that reunite?
Okay. We have to reckon with our own personal values, in that, do we honestly believe that all men and women are created equal? Because we've been programmed to think in some cases otherwise in terms of intelligence, knowledge, equal opportunities, fitness for certain jobs, and so forth. I'd like to drop a few names for research for our audience to take the time and visit YouTube and listen to a guy by the name of Tim Weiss. Listen to a young lady by the name of, oh boy, she did the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise 50 years ago, Jane Elliott. She's still alive and kicking. Those two, and also we've lost a very dynamic anti-racism person about 5 years ago, Frances Welsing. She was a psychiatrist, okay, and talked about how oppression, discrimination, and so on and so forth has affected us all. And so again, we need to hear more truth of the founding of our country and be truthful with ourselves as to how we value one another, because discrimination and feelings and prejudice and power are all mixed in when we talk about trying to achieve something through the current buzzwords and capacities of diversity, inclusion, and those kinds of folks, because in a lot of cases, those are just smoke screens in addressing the real problems. So we as individuals have to reckon with the fact, do we want a democracy, or do we want what's been echoed around certain places, a king and an aristocracy?
Thank you, Mr. Cook. And in case you didn't see it, Steve Chappell put a link in the chat for Living Room Conversations that also gives some tips on how to engage in hard conversations productively.
And now we're going to go into our breakout rooms, and this is an opportunity to model having those conversations. Now, I don't know how many people who watched the movie and don't share a firm opinion about the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion have engaged with us tonight. So in your breakout room, there might be more difference of opinion, or there might be less difference of opinion. But I really encourage you to be honest in your comments so that we can really engage in truly honest dialogue, to remain respectful, but to speak your truth and not be afraid to do so, because we have to be able to do that. We have to be able to model speaking our truth and doing so respectfully and listening to each other. So I'm going to send you to breakout rooms now. There will be a facilitator in your room, 3 to 4 people in the room, so a good number to model this. The questions all come from Living Room Conversations. The first one is, what are your hopes and concerns for your family, community, and country? And the facilitators know all of the questions. They'll prompt you as we go. I'll send a little message for when it's time to move to the next one. But that's your first question, and you'll have 5 minutes. I'm going to send you to your rooms now. And if we lose some people, I might juggle and move you to another room, just so you know. Everyone's received an invitation to a conversation, and that you embraced the conflict, if there was conflict in your group, in a respectful way. So we're going to do a quick checkout with our facilitators to see if there's any particular comment you want to share, wisdom gleaned, or a next step that was identified. And we'll start with Mary Jane in room 1.
People in our breakout room talked about how they, in a difficult situation, they wanted to be brave in speaking out, but do it diplomatically and refrain from showing anger, but be ambassadors in the conversation.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, group 1. How about group 2 and Mary?
Well, someone in our group has started a book club, and the purpose of which is to equip people to be better collaborators and listen to each other. And he's purposely tried to invite people into the group with diverse opinions. And someone else said that they believe that she's inspired to try to start her own book club based on that.
All right, fantastic. Great job, group 2. I am pleased, send us the information about those book clubs if they're open to the public, so that we can share that information.
You're by
with
invitation
others.
only.
Oh, never mind. Thank you for the work you're doing. How about group 3, Greg?
Thanks, Barbara. We had a great conversation. I was pleased to have 2 rock stars in Gail Ringerberg and Floyd with us. So I was privileged to be with those 2. I think we talked about a couple of different things that were kind of interesting. One was, how do we move the ball forward? You know, Gail has an extensive experience with international travel and talked about the importance of getting out of just our home environment, which we all agreed with. And Floyd talked a lot about the benefits of small groups, kind of echoing a previous conversation, and how church to church, small group to small group is probably another path forward for people to have this important conversation.
Yeah, great observations and recommendations. Thank you. Thanks, group 3. How about group 4, Jamie?
I could have stayed in my group for another hour. I had Joy in our group and we had a really great dialogue. The main takeaway point from the question was because this can all feel so overwhelming at times, that we can listen better for understanding, share more personal narratives, and so to gain a better understanding of the other, and find ways that we can be better community advocates.
Thank you. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you, group 4. How about group 5, Elliot?
Well, I had a great conversation with Karen and Chris. They were just absolutely fantastic throughout the whole thing. So kudos to them, first of all, because this is a difficult topic. But I think one of the biggest things we came to the conclusion of, Karen and Chris both pointed it out, we all learn different things based upon what in-group we're already in. So we kind of decided that the best game is to give each other tools, so to speak, that we get from our groups and pass them on to somebody who's not necessarily in that same group. So we compared it to like a baton race, really, where it's like everybody's hearing something different, everybody's getting a different technique, and frankly, everybody can present things to their in-group in a different way. So we should be trying to do that while also stepping outside of our in-group and handing those same insights to other people outside of that. Realistically, we just need to keep the conversation going is what we landed on.
Excellent. Excellent. I love that. Thank you so much. And thank you, facilitators. Make sure that you send all of those notes over to me and my staff so that we can pour over those when the Anti-Racism Task Force meets again. Really, really grateful for your assistance tonight. We do have some polling questions. So I'm going to launch this. There are 3 questions. The first one is, how comfortable are you talking with someone from a different place on the political spectrum now compared to before you watched the movie or participated in the conversation? Much more comfortable, no change, less comfortable, or much less comfortable. How helpful was this event? Not at all. It made me more aware. It motivated me to take action. It convinced me to become or continue as an advocate. And 3, what actions are you willing to take now? Are you willing to read and listen, to learn more, to engage in more conversations on a variety of topics with people who maybe feel differently? And would you be interested in receiving additional resources? So you need to answer all 3 of those questions and then hit submit for your answers to be recorded. And I'm just going to hold on as I see those numbers going up. And ask everyone, just make sure you hit that submit button. And I'm going to close it in 3, 2, 1. There we go. Perfect. Got everybody. So I'm going to share this. About half of the people felt more comfortable having these conversations, and about half felt the same. So I think that's a successful event. In terms of how helpful this was, 27% said it made them more aware, the same percentage motivated to take action, and 47% convinced you to become or continue as an advocate. And finally, 60% are willing to read or listen to podcasts, 87% to engage in more conversations, and 40% are interested in receiving additional resources. Oh, and I apologize, I didn't hit the share results button. So let me do that a moment so you can see these results for yourself. Here's question 1. Here's question 2. And here's question 3. Really helpful to accumulate that information. So thank you for participating. A couple of next steps I might suggest is to go to the Momentum Center website, the anti-racism page, and click on the button for Read, Watch, and Reflect to share what your final thoughts and observations are, having watched the movie and or participated in this conversation. And if there are actions you've taken, report it. Share that with the community. Let people know what you're doing. A big thank you to Joy and Floyd. Could not be more grateful for your participation and your sharing and your vulnerability tonight. Another thank you to our sponsors, to WGVU, to the Chamber, the NAACP, the staff at the Momentum Center, the Fetzer Institute, and to Meyer. Please let these people know how grateful we are for their support. And this is just a list of everyone who's part of the Anti-Racism Task Force. This is really a critical group in our community, and I also ask you to reach out and thank them for their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And finally, a thank you to Steve. Steve is the person who brought this to my attention, who asked for us to partner. He's been incredible to work with, and I'm so grateful. Grateful for everybody who is here, our facilitators tonight, and our participants. Steve, is there anything you'd like to say as we wrap up?
Yes, I just want to thank the Momentum Center and the wonderful members, volunteers, supporters that are here tonight connected with the Momentum Center. And I say that on behalf of WGVU. The Fetzer Institute, I know, will be very interested in hearing how well this went. So thank you.
We have recorded it. We can make this available and continue kind of the ripple effect. So the folks that couldn't be here tonight because it's September, we'll make sure that they're still looped in, and that we all are empowered to continue the conversation. So until next time, the divine in me recognizes and bows to the divine in you. Namaste.